Hello, everyone. My name's Arthur Kaufmann. I've been a professional astrologer for 4.5 decades now. And I live up here in Mount Shasta, California. And I've been spending the last few weeks really buckling down and looking into the minuscule and the details and the data of 2026. And I'm glad to bring it to you tonight. I want to show you the visions that I have. I want to show you how I interpret the stars. I want to show you what I see when I interpret these stars. And I've been talking about 2026 since 2020. But this is the peak of things that have started, many things that have started in 2026. Okay. I've spent many years looking at the future over 4.5 decades. All right. For me, my family, my clients, the community, I see what works. I see what doesn't work. I see what are the basics. I see what has been added to astrology as fluff. And I'm not going to get into any of that stuff. Today, I call myself an astrological minimalist. It's the planets, the sun, moon, the nodes, Chiron sometimes, but most of the time, there's so much there with the basics. And people add too much, 2,000 asteroids. You're going to find something that works for your agenda. If you're dealing with just the basics, it's harder to spin it to one side or the other. It's usually rather clear cut. Okay, so again, welcome to 2026. I've entitled this year the year of Mannafestation, the year thy bowl runneth over. Okay, let me tell you why. All right. Now, there's so much here in 2026 that normally I do a lecture or a gathering, which I've done hundreds. I just wing it. I just talk about things. I might have stuff on 3x5 cards. I don't like finalizing it on a PowerPoint that you have to follow in an order. But this time there was so much, I actually scripted it out as an outline because there's just too much. I'd go off on tangents and probably never get around to what I really should be talking about. So I scripted it out as an outline, and it's 33 pages long. So buckle up, and I'm going to be reading a lot of this. So I'm very clear about what I have to say. Okay. This is the most optimistic that I've been about a coming year in a long time. I remember 2020, I called it the year of the rototiller when I was forecasting for the year, And this year, the energy, the peak, the manna from heaven, as I like to call it, it peaks this summer, okay? And it all comes to a head with what I'm calling, it's a planetary pattern that I call the mystic bowl, all right? When our planets form patterns in the sky, think a constellation, okay? In this case, in 2026, that pattern looks like a giant bowl, right? This pattern has been called a bucket in the past. It's been called a cradle. And in this case, in 2026, encompasses all of the planets, including Pluto, from Jupiter on out. And these 5 planets are all in beneficial 60-degree or 120-degree aspects. This is rare, beyond our lifetime and frequency, the rarity of it. There's a song I stumbled on while I was prepping this talk, okay? And it's called Change is on the Rise by Avi Kaplan. It's kind of a gospel-based sort of thing, but it really sums up what I feel is the theme for this year. And it sends chills and down my spine when I listen to it. Put it on your playlist. Add it to your playlist. Listen to it. Change is on the Rise by Avi Kaplan. I'll put a link in the description. Okay. The only harsh aspect for this year, all right, is a Jupiter-Pluto opposition midsummer, which normally could be somewhat arrogant, all right? But this time in 2026, the Jupiter-Pluto opposition occurs as part of this mystic bowl pattern that I'm talking about, which is going to bring out the much more positive sides of Jupiter and Pluto. This is going to manifest in the long term in a very strident social justice reform movement in 2026. I feel sorry for those that have committed crimes and have skated up until now. Political parties are not immune. Nations and their rulers are not immune from what's coming down in 2026, okay? 2026 is going to expose many of them, especially if those crimes were committed or implemented in 2020 when our current Jupiter-Pluto cycle first began. The opposition of Jupiter and Pluto this summer is very much a fruition of those events that started in 2020. This year, 2026, we're going to see lawsuits and a lot of legal hammers, as I like to put it, slapped on many who have felt insulated from such. No, I didn't say rulings, okay? I said lawsuits. The rulings will mostly occur in 2028 and 2029 when we see Jupiter trine Pluto with both planets trine Uranus, which gives us a grand air trine, with Jupiter as the arbiter, Uranus as the catalyst, and Pluto the reformer, all forming the strongest structure in nature, a triangle, or what's called a trine in astrology. All occurring in air signs, mind you, the element of ingenuity, observation, and intellectual acumen. This is when we will see sense and sensibility return to our society. 24, 25, actually since 2020, it's been lacking, okay? And this sensibility we're going to see through the laws that are passed and the ones that are upheld, or more precisely, reinforced. Come 2028, it can be noted that transiting Jupiter will be conjunct the US natal Saturn in the 11th house. This warrants well for the will of the people and will be when we will see many of our just rewards manifest from the lawsuits that come down in 2026, especially those things that are concerning 2020 issues. I've been speaking about 2026 since 2020. 2026 is what I would call the first harvest from what was sown in 2020. Finally, in 2026, we will see what our efforts have borne. Was it a good harvest, or do we need to acknowledge that we may go hungry these next few years and come up with a better plan? I'd like to say, I'm speaking figuratively here, but there's a few things in 2026 that say it could be literal too. Right? I suspect the former will be the fate, since the way everything is lined up, there's just wonderful transits this year. So speaking figuratively for 2026, the harvest dance this year is going to be phenomenal, okay? Which is why I have affectionately subtitled this forecast, the year of Mannafestation. Manna, the divine substance, the spiritual food that comes from above, especially in times of need. Festa, an Italian word for feast, festivity, holiday, okay? And tion, the suffix that denotes an action or process or the results that we get from that action or process. 2026, the year of Mannafestation. Excuse me. Since the grand conjunctions of 2020, when we had 5 major planetary conjunctions in one year, humanity has been on an opportunistic upswing, believe it or not. All right? With the majority of major planetary cycles activating what's called their waxing phase. This is growth, the growth phase, intention, increase, all leading to a fruition phase. And by February of 2026, we will see 9 out of the 10 big planetary cycles, all right, that are used by astrologers, all in their growth and opportunistic phases, 9 out of 10. When we were in 2020, it was less than half, okay? I really should call it a mystic cauldron, not a mystic bowl. A large kettle or boiler. A bowl is for holding and feeding. A cauldron is for mixing it up, adding heat and transforming whatever was put in the cauldron. Given that this mystic bowl all occurs in the outer planets in fire and air signs, it's definitely a cauldron, not a bowl, okay? We're talking flame and bellows here, right? Or more precisely, it's a bowl that transforms into a cauldron this summer when Jupiter ignites the fires and enters the fire sign of Leo at the end of June. This, figuratively speaking here again, is the waters of Aquarius pouring down upon us from high. This is us capturing and collecting these high vibrational states and waters within the net, within the bowl of our solar system. 2026 adds the fire, the heat, what I call the dragon's breath, when Jupiter enters Leo late in June. And what will be served up to humanity this year is going to be some potent stuff, okay? What used to be called, as I said, manna from heaven. And with all the planets and early degrees of fire and air signs, we're going to be hard-pressed to learn new ways to ingest and express this spiritual manna, this feast from the gods. Now, the big question for 2026, do we eat, do we partake, or do we drive by without stopping? Maybe we stop for too long and overeat. This manifestation, do we even see what is being offered on the menu this year? For some, the lessons of 2026, what we stomach, what we allow to enter into us, may come as a shock, as if suddenly forced upon us. For most, 2026 will be the match that lights the fusion of expansion, growth, and awareness. For many, they'll be victimized in 2026. They just can't bear the change. For most, they see the initiations that are upon us in 2026 for what they are, and willingly push past their personal limits to go for the gold. Now, it's to be remembered that if one wants one's cup to runneth over, that it's often necessary to first pour out the old stagnant essence that is collected in our cups, as to not dilute or pollute what lies before us, what we want to add to our cup, what's going to happen this year. It is often a very personal and very poignant process to let go, to cleanse, to get clean, so to speak. Yet the potential, after we have cleansed our cups, is what we're looking for here in 2026. The potential for the empty bowl or cup, the potential for what we can collect next, clean, clear essence, untainted by our collective past, sent from the heavens to nourish not just our bodies, but our souls. Manifestation again here. This is what I see for 2026. The angels of the air signs are pouring forth their light and frequency for all of mankind. There's no light statement here either. The harmony of the symbol for Aquarius is replacing the disharmony of Pisces. Pisces, if you understand the symbol, the two fish tied together at the tail, Pisces, those fish are pulling apart from each other. There's a duality, masculine, femininity, God's out there somewhere versus in here, okay? This is the Piscean age. In Aquarius, if you look at the symbol for Aquarius, it's two lines. Actually, it used to be in ancient time, two waves, which is much more appropriate, okay? But really what's going on is in the ancient times, they really didn't have symbols when the signs were written. They didn't have the symbols for essence or for vibratory frequency and so on. This is what Aquarius is giving to the world, all right? Aquarius harmonizes things. Now, the negative side of that is if you're outside the bell curve of the harmony, you get shunted aside. An old teacher of mine used to say, the Aquarian archetype will step over the bum to feed the whales. It's the Borg in its worst sense. Okay, it's the higher side of democracy in its best sense. Now, I have to remind folks that when we enter a new age, we do not immediately get all the good stuff, okay? It's more like what happens when we strike a large bell, swinging back and forth from the good parts to the bad. In this case, when we're talking about an age, over 2,000 years, we're talking the first few generations here. In a way, till at least the middle of the 21st century, possibly to the end of the 21st century, right? It swings back and forth between good and bad, all right? Then, toward the end of the century, we're going to see a proper approach. And so it must be remembered that an age is over 200 generations long. And we're currently in the birthing or formative stages of the new age. All right. Aquarius has crowned, it has delivered, and now it's going to do everything it can to stay alive over these next few generations. Do you see the importance of the times we live in? Do you see how the things that we do are going to ripple on down through hundreds of generations? There's no coincidence why we are here now. There's no coincidence why there's what, almost 8 billion people on the planet now. It has been said in very ancient writings that everybody wants to be here for the turning of the ages. And then once the ages are here, it's like, okay, been there, done that, off to some other life or reality. So that has to be taken into account too, what's going to be happening over the next few generations. Why am I so gung-ho about 2026? In the face of so much political, economic, and social upheaval? Because out of the 11 major aspects that are being formed in 2026, the major aspects from Jupiter on out to Pluto, all right, 10 are positive and 1 is negative, that Jupiter-Pluto opposition I talked about. That's some pretty good odds, 10 to 1, okay? Even the one major outer planetary conjunction that occurs this year, and the only major planetary conjunction this year, remember, 2020 had 5, and remember what that did, all right? The one and only major conjunction for 2026 will occur in the fiery and initiatory sign of Aries, in very early Aries, as a matter of fact, and thus very unrefined and brash energy, especially once we see Jupiter enter Leo, just in time for America's biggest, bestest birthday celebration. I tell you, I love looking at Trump's Leo rising and Mars on his ascendant, okay? He really knows how to put on a party. But Leo rising, they do pomp and circumstance. They know what that is, okay? The theater. Now, I do need to point out the little fact that of the 10 positive aspects that we see in 2026, 7 of them are sextiles and 3 are trines, right? Sextiles are like one of those old-fashioned hand-driven water pumps. If you don't prime them, you don't activate the sextile, you don't activate the pump. Not much is going to happen. If you don't grasp for the brass ring, you get nothing. Stretch out a bit more than normal and you get a prize. This is 2026 in a nutshell. Keep this in mind throughout the year. Even just a 10% effort can reap much more than we would think this year, especially as summer arrives. One of the main themes for 2026 is this Saturn-Neptune conjunction at less than 1 degree of Aries. And I can sum this up in 5 words for this year as the major theme. And that is, we are on our own. Okay, we are on our own. We are going to be our own. This is the start of a 36-year cycle, which, by the way, has not happened at 1 degree of Aries since something like over 6,000 years ago. Okay, so we're on our own, all right? Reclaiming our power. And it's not about the herd. It's about breaking from the herd and exploring the world around us, that we might live a better individualistic life. I have to point out here that in astrology, there really isn't 12 signs, there's 6 axes. And the sign that is across the zodiac, when you see it as a circle, as a chart wheel, the sign that's across from the age of Aquarius is Leo, the sign of the individual, the sign of the person who will stand up and say, I have a better way. I can hold my head up high and lead, all right? This is going to be the antidote to the Aquarian problems and possibilities, okay? It's the idea that with Aquarius, if you're not in the center of the herd, you fall through the cracks, all right? You're not going to be helped, right? What makes all the difference is the Leo temperament. Study Leo, what it stands for. It's a person, again, who can hold their head up high because of their morality, their integrity, and their honor throughout their life. And they can look God or people in the eye and say, this is what I stand for, and this is what I'm going to do, no matter what the herd tells me to do. It's reclaiming our power. In 2026, we have the help of the Aquarian angels. They're going to be pouring out their manna. But what comes out of that urn, that cornucopia, as we see in the constellation of Aquarius. It must be understood that true religious integration and spiritual connectedness is a personal, individual experience, okay? It is not and should not be dedicated or dictated by any middlemen or intercessors. This is one of the big gifts of 2026. We were not helpless spectators this year. We engaged with revived inspiration and doubled down on our determination. And it is to be remembered that some of the best resistance, okay, some of the best protest is not to engage at all, to go our separate ways and not buy into the narrative, the hype, the angst. Okay, in 2025, we saw the mystic ball try to come together. But without Jupiter's help, Jupiter was in Cancer at the time, not in a fire sign, it didn't gel, all right? Most of the planets, except Pluto, were in water and earth signs. And water and earth likes to find the bottom, finds the basis, the shallow ground, so to speak, okay? Now, once Jupiter enters Leo this July 29th, the mystic bowl, the cauldron is lit. The fire under the cauldron is lit. All right? For all you Jim Henson fans out there, think of it as the Skeksis and the mystics coming together to heal the dark crystal, okay? Once the planets align, and whenever I remember this movie, I wish I had an orrery like Agra had in that movie, okay? Whenever the planets align, the transformation can take place. The mystic bowl becomes the mystic cauldron, starting in late June throughout mid-December of 2026. And the reason for this is Jupiter will be in direct motion in Leo, moving through Leo, the heart and the courage of the lion. And it's going to be brought into the mix. It lights the fire. The mystic bowl then manifests in physical form as best as it can. The manna falls, we collect it, we ingest it, we decide how to express it, okay? And we invoke it. We invoke the lion. When I think on the cosmic conditions for this summer, I'm kind of reminded of Saint Michael's stepping on the head of the dragon, slaying the dragon, okay? Or Aslan in the Chronicles of Narnia, or Simba in The Lion King, okay? It's righteousness squared, okay? The light conquering the dark, all right? Given that the rim or lip of the mystic bowl will be Jupiter in early Leo in opposition to Pluto in early Aquarius, this is the one, actually very quick, is seen as a difficult aspect in astrology, the only one for the whole year. Counting from Jupiter on out. There's always good and bad ones between the inner moving planets because they're moving so fast, okay? Jupiter opposite Pluto is like a classic hero's journey archetype, okay? Where us mere individuals must define what is different in our characters from the societal norms which we must live within. Where do we go against the grain? And when do we follow the herd? What happens if the whole herd decides to go against the grain? Okay. And if you're following the herd in front of you, what are you really looking at? All right. I often think about this and say, no, not me, So to pull back a bit for 2026, let's pull back and look at the planets from the outer edge, the slower moving cycles, and move in toward the sun. Okay, so Pluto, now in Aquarius, is going to be there until 2044. All right. My concern is that the US natal chart that has the south node of the moon in Aquarius, okay, which means Pluto's coming up on it in 28 and 29, all right, one time in 250 years, all right, and the United States also has its natal moon in Aquarius. So South Node and the Moon in Aquarius, right? With these are both things that are tied to the past. They're tied to the security. The Moon is the people in astrology in a nation's country's chart. It stands for the safety and security of the people, not the government, not the business environment, but the family, the mothers especially. Okay. As Pluto traverses this US South Node, all right, in 2028 and 2029, which has not happened again since the birth of the country, we're very likely to repeat actions and mistakes from the past. All right. And 2028 and 2029 is where we'll have to live up to our past, forgive our transgressions, and realign, this important thing here, realign our futures. Then, when we get to 2041 and 2042, Pluto will go across the US natal moon. Another 248-year cycle in the making, all right? For a country, again, the moon is the myriad of people. Pluto over the natal moon, coming up in the late 30s, early 2040s, all right, is a defining moment for the people that make up this nation. Last time it happened in the mid-1970s, we saw the famous whiskey rebellion, okay, that had to do with too much tax, right? And by the way, it also led to the first use of the military against the US people. Don't want to have to repeat that one. We also saw the ratification of the 11th Amendment to the Constitution, okay, which really, ever since, has presented the nation with an ever-evolving issue of states versus federal rights. This is also going to be a major, major issue over the next 2 decades. We all must remember that under a Pluto transit, okay, to a country's moon, the people have some major changes ahead. Doesn't matter what country, doesn't matter what kind. Especially in this case, for America, in Aquarius, it's about our technocracy. It's our technical capabilities, our connectivity, the smart universe, okay? What's never really ever understood or known to the public is that Pluto ensures rebirth. It just doesn't kill things, okay? It ensures that we're reborn with renewed energy, vigor, and substance. The compost pile always becomes the fertilizer for the next generation, all right? The phoenix always rises. This is Pluto, right? It may take years, sometimes decades for a country, but it always happens without fail. All right, next planet in, looking from the outside of their solar system. We'll look at Neptune, and we're going to skip over Uranus because Neptune and Saturn are both forming a conjunction, a 30-year cycle in early Aries. Again, it happens every 36 years, but the idea that it happens at the beginning of the zodiac, the 1 degree of Aries out of a 360-degree possibility of the zodiac, it's been over 6,000 years. This needs to be understood, and we need to look at history here. Maybe not necessarily the history that is considered science right now, all right? I've always felt that science was made to be broken. All right, upon entering Aries, both planets will be at the midpoint between Uranus and Pluto. So we're going to have Uranus, then Saturn and Neptune, and then Pluto, with sextiles in between Saturn and Neptune, sextile to Uranus, sextile to Pluto. All right, this is excellent. All right, this is what I would call bringing out the working capital of Saturn, Neptune, and Aries. Neptune's the power of our imagination. All right, it's the energy, all right, that gives us our vision, that gives us our spiritual realities, and the power on its negative side to obfuscate and misdirect, right? Neptune has been in its ruling sign of Pisces since 2011, and tell me that society hasn't had to deal with obfuscation, addiction, and misdirection. This is all the negative side of Neptune through Pisces. Right? Now, Neptune in Aries warrants a different approach, more of a direct approach, or nothing at all. If you want the beatific visions, all right, no one can do it for you. If you want to walk in God's grace, no one can take you there. You have to be the one to do it. You take the road not taken. Pilgrimages will be on the rise in 2026, not to Rome or Lourdes or the Sphinx or all the tourist traps, okay, but individual, remote, road not taken kind of spiritual journeys, all right? Religion becomes a direct experience in 2026 and actually for the next 2 decades. Once again, religion will be practiced in solitude outside the walls of temples and churches. With Neptune leaving Pisces, again, the sign of drugs and addiction, and entering the challenging sign of Aries, we're going to see halfway houses, addiction centers, and rehab facilities skyrocket in importance and in value for you investors out there. We will see a return or a further return to natural herbal remedies as a way to self-treat our maladies without the intercession of the medical doctor, okay? We will see a rising tide of religious exemptions coming back into our lives, as well as a continued rising of what I would call a quasi-religious nationalistic approach to our national borders and boundaries. Saturn in Aries is going to lock down some very stringent boundaries and borders, adding a myriad of new rules and regulations to our governmental processes. Right? Even with the stripping of the government employees, the laws and executive orders and rules are going to become multitudinous till 2028. Saturn now in Aries is the quicker planet, all right? So Saturn moves quicker than Neptune. And so Saturn will be acting upon Neptune. And think the tortoise and the hare. All right. Saturn here is the hare, Neptune the tortoise. First, Saturn's penchant for rules and restrictions and regulations is going to be seen in 2026, 27, and 28. Then Neptune gains the advantage for the following 10 years, leading to the loosening of social restrictions, all right, and a return of more spiritual values, more personal spiritual values. And this is a worldwide issue, not just in America. I'm very optimistic here when I see that Saturn and Neptune are in such good fortune, with Uranus, the planet that likes to upset apple carts, okay, and Pluto, the planet that decomposes that which needs to be thrown away, whether you like it or not. All right, Saturn in Aries will give us the clarity to see that at this time in our history, if you want to get something done right, it's best to do it yourself. Accountability rests with the initiator, okay, not the recipient. If we're going to instigate actions, we darn well have to learn to live with the consequences. Okay, healthcare, Social Security, even, all right? The insurance industry, banking cartels, all are going to become unreliable over these next 2 decades with a noticeable downturn in 2027 and 2028. 2026 here is the year that we can get ahead of this curve, all right? Make a better plan, create a better outcome. If we reach for the brass ring I talked about, all right? If we dare ourselves to reach beyond our safe zones and challenge ourselves to make miracles happen, all right? To take up the new standards and vow an oath of self rather than society. Self first, then country. That's what it has to be, okay? The two go hand in hand, but it's not a which came first, the chicken or the egg issue. The self always comes first, okay? This is, so to take up these new standards and to invest and invoke and partake of this spiritual energy, this manna from heaven, okay, that's what it's for, right? All right? to sustain us in times of trial, all right, to get us where we want to go. Okay, next, Uranus, all right, presently back in the sign of Taurus for a last hurrah before he enters Gemini in April of 2026, there to stay until 2033. Remember those old commercials on TV? This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs, right? And it usually showed a bunch of eggs frying in a frying pan, right? This is one of the scenarios of 2026 and over the next 8 years too. Too much input, too much data, and people pop, you go kaput, okay? Thinking and perception will become the new frontier, especially how we teach our children. How do we ingest that information, all right? Now, novel and noxious efforts will be made, no doubt, to have to do with tailored, standalone AI modules as teachers, okay? It's not going to be this general tap into ChatGPT. I don't even like saying the words, okay? All right, it's not. It's going to be individual modules, the way you used to buy a CD or an album on a disc, and then you could play the whole album, okay? Want to become a nuclear engineer? Just buy the AI module. Pass the course with the AI's help, of course, and start practicing your profession in no time. I don't see generic AI sticking around for long. I do see this specialized, individualized, tailored AI module approach taking precedent. This is going to be how society will want to augment its realities. It's called edge computing, by the way, okay? And does away with the need for these large data centers, thank God, okay? Gemini is a sign of duality, a yin-yang approach to life. It's also light versus dark, Cain versus Abel, Castor and Pollux, okay? A split in consciousness. Remember, Gemini is an air sign. This split personality will be obvious for all to see. Most noticeable will be the split between self-owned, individuated technology and this more hive mind, cloud-centered tech, okay? And it's with the Aryan emphasis this year. To me, it's clear we're not going to do the lemming things, okay? It's going to be more like we become eagles, all right? The Borg be damned here, right? We're going to take an individual approach. The people to invest in are the folks that are doing the individuated modules. All right, kind of reminds me of like Duolingo or something like that, where you can buy the app that will let you translate a particular language. But this is where we're headed. Mm-hmm. I've talked in the past about how Gemini is going to absolutely transform our transportation system, okay? With us being able to send packages and freight through kind of a Star Trek type transporter system, most definitely by 2033, okay? We're not going to get to the true biological transporter systems and properties worked out. We're not going to have them worked out until Uranus gets into Cancer, which is the mid to late 2030s. Right? Next, I have to reiterate the idea that our economy would become fixated on tangibles while Uranus was in Taurus. I've been talking about this since 2019 when it first went into Taurus. Right? This fixation continues until late 2026 and is going to send tangible assets, not paper, not Bitcoin, not ETFs, not anything, but what you can hold distinctly in your hand and touch it. Right? This is going to radically increase the value of these physical assets, including housing, dramatically the first few months of 2026. Jumping back to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction emit, right? I did want to also mention that Saturn is the father of boundaries and limits, okay? And Neptune is the boundless one. With these two planets coming together, you can bet immigration and the actual physical borders are going to continue to be, how they would say, huge, okay? Huge topics in society. Mm-hmm. Did anyone notice that as both Saturn and Neptune dip their toes into Aries for an exploratory mission in 2025, how these issues were pushed to the forefront. And it wasn't just in the US or due to Trump, okay? It's prevalent around the world. And with the conjunction occurring in Aries, coming in February, it is going to continue as a somewhat nationalistic trend across the planet. The definition of a border is changing. This is Saturn conjunct Neptune. Anytime that happens. Where do we stop? Okay, these are the kind of questions. Where do our borders stop and where do our borders start? What defines a border? Is it race, language, religion, economic indicators, geography? When I think on this, I vote for geography, okay? It's the tribe, it's the village. Now, for the icing on the cake for 2026, we see Jupiter moving from Cancer to Leo in late June. Jupiter's been in Cancer since June of 2025, and Cancer has always been associated with silver. It should be noted that silver rose in value over 100% since June of 2025. And I expect, after a slight pullback in early January and possibly early February, silver will keep climbing until June, when Jupiter finally leaves Cancer for a 13-month stay in the sign of Leo. There to stay in Leo until the summer of 2027. And guess what metal is associated with Leo? Right? You got it, gold. Okay, so silver's going to rise, keep rising, with a little downswing beginning of the year, but keep rising until the end of April. Thereafter, you think gold's gone up now. Okay. Mars will conjunct all the planets in our solar system this year. This doesn't always happen, okay? Starting with a very interesting conjunction to the Sun and Venus the first few days of the new year, followed by the first of 3 conjunctions to Mercury to Mars, mid-January. This is going to start the year off with a bang, both economically and, unfortunately, militarily too. There are economic headwinds in early January, military disclosures beginning mid-January that continue throughout the end of April. Mars will conjunct Pluto toward the end of January. And in history, Mars conjunct Pluto often produces wars and incursions. Mix Mars and Mercury together with Pluto, and we get major headlines, usually not to our liking, unless, of course, you work for the Pentagon, the military-industrial complex, right? Mars will conjunct Saturn and Neptune in April, which will bring up major issues around how far the military is allowed to go. The thing that has me most worried this year is a Mars-Uranus conjunction on July 3rd, not moments away from the 250-year birthday celebration of the United States. This is a powder keg, folks, just waiting to explode. And with this conjunction occurring in Gemini, the explosions are going to pop up in much more than one location. The 4th and 5th of July look, okay, less dangerous, all right? It's that week leading up to the 4th that has me telling all of you to be on your toes, all right? Maybe avoid large crowds, okay? Mars then seems to quiet down after July and does not pop up again until early October, when Mars opposes Pluto. This will be where we have to face the consequences that were initiated back toward the end of January. Mars will conjunct Jupiter this November, which will end the year on a much more positive note than it started. All right? A lot of the gifts that we get this year, we don't realize them as gifts until November and December. Then we're like, whoa, oh, okay, I'll take that. Venus conjuncts the Sun, Mars, and Pluto in the first month of 2026, foretelling a rather uncomfortable January. Fortunately, by March, Venus is conjoined with Saturn and Neptune in Aries, and we will see gallantry increase and faith reaffirmed once again. Venus conjuncts Uranus at the end of April and conjuncts Jupiter in early June, making for a most enjoyable spring. Venus does not fare well in July, August, or September, so this summer, as stupendous as the summer is going to be, it's not initially going to be to our liking, or more precisely, Venus is rubbed raw this summer, okay? We do not always see our gifts as initially presented to us as beneficial. And again, with Venus, it's not until she turns retrograde in Scorpio in November that we're really going to understand and see what the gifts were for 2026. And with Venus, by the way, retrograding in Scorpio back into Libra in November, we may see a number of public figures, especially women, pleading for forgiveness from past actions. And given the extreme nature of Scorpio, we're also going to see many young women go completely dark. Okay, it's going to be the extremes, positive and negative. Please remember, what we lend our energies to is what flourishes. What we ignore dies away. Now, all the Mercury retrogrades in 2026, of which there are 3, will all be in water signs, ensuring that Mercury spends more than half of all of 2026 in the water element, which accentuates intuition, our ability to perceive, our perceptual tools. Mercury this year goes a long way toward teaching us what's real and what's not. We will instinctively know. We won't have to be told. The eclipses this year are twofold, with the solar eclipses occurring in the masculine fire and air signs, giving us a burst of cosmic initiatory energy this year. The lunar eclipses will be in the feminine signs of Virgo and Pisces, giving us further keys to our instinctual realms of understanding. The solar eclipse at 29 Aquarius in February will really only be seen down in Antarctica and southern Africa, although the total lunar eclipse at 13 Virgo in early March will be seen everywhere on the planet except Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And get this, totality will be seen along the Pacific Northwest states. So keep an eye there. This is a good sign for agriculture on the West Coast as spring approaches. Now, the total solar eclipse at 26 Leo in mid-August barely touches the United States, but really does a number on Spain and Greenland, okay? The partial lunar eclipse in late August at 5 degrees Pisces hits the whole Western world. What is of most interest to me is that the total lunar eclipse we see in early March is conjunct the US midheaven, which puts the lunar eclipse itself at the top of the US chart and the sun at the bottom of the US chart, signifying a fall from grace moment for the US starting in March. The other point of interest when it comes to eclipses this year is that the solar eclipse in February will activate, albeit ever so slightly, the US natal moon. And I suspect we're going to see stirrings this late winter and early spring of what will become a full-blown major issue for the people of the US come 2028 and 2029. And it's going to be an essential human rights situation with critical personal and familial safety and security issues. Where do we reside? That's the big question. Do we reside in a particular country? If so, what rights are we given from this country versus the rights that we are due as individuals? Next down, do we reside in a particular state? Same question. What are the rights that these particular states mandate on us, not bestow, okay, mandate on us versus what is allowed for individual persons? Do we live in a specific county? More rights and rules. A city, even more issues about individual rights versus the rights that are regulated or dictated to the self versus the tribe. The tribe is important here this year, all right? But the major balance, remember, Libra is the sign that does the best this year. The major balance that has to be partaken of this year is that balance between individual liberties, individual rights, and the continuity of the tribe. I'm always lamenting the idea that the Iroquois nation, how they used to, all their decisions mostly were based upon the idea of how is it going to be received by our 7th generation. Moving into the age of Aquarius, this should be how we approach any rule, any regulation. And short term is not what we're here about. Sorry, individuality implies a duty to the community, to the state. It is through the state and the community that individuality exists. All right. It's how individuality best expresses itself. This is important to understand for 2026. It's interesting to note. Oh, okay. So check this out. The eclipse, one of the eclipses, the eclipse in Leo, all right, in August, is on Trump's ascendant, Mars, his natal Mars in the ascendant, and it goes across Greenland. You see where this is going here? You think he's going to make another run at Greenland? Yep. Okay. It's of interest to note, too, that the transits we see for the U.S. repeat a pattern first seen when this country was born. Mars will be in Gemini this summer, which is where the U.S. had Mars at birth. And both transiting Mars and natal Mars are in conjunction this summer. It happens every 2 years, no big deal, okay? But at the same time this summer, Uranus, an 84-year cycle, all right, will also be in Gemini, which is where Uranus was when the country was being birthed. And they too, transiting Uranus and natal Uranus, will be in conjunction, okay? This ends up making the statistical possibility of both Uranus being back in Gemini and Mars being back in Gemini. It's something like, I'm not very good at statistics, but I'd say it's somewhere up in the 160 to 1 possibility, okay? All right, so let me ask you this. What's the difference between the U.S. Mandate of manifest destiny throughout its lineage here, all right, as we see in our country's past, and the manifest destiny that I'm ascribing to 2026? This will be a big question worth answering in 2026. And fortunately, okay, transiting Jupiter will be forming a conjunction to the U.S. natal North Node in the U.S. 8th house this summer. I love the North Node, okay? It reveals our best lessons to learn this lifetime, and it reveals our most strident path to be walked. Jupiter activating the U.S. North Node is another gift from the gods in 2026. Only happens every 12 years. The questions we usually ask ourselves when the North Node is, any of our North Nodes are triggered, all right, is what do we do with our past, okay? Where do we go from here? What is the best path forward for my soul growth? How do I dissipate my past that I may move forward with ease toward my destiny? 2026 is the best time in 12 years to be asking these questions and doing something about it, especially the second half of the year. It is of interest to me, too, that the 250th birthday bash of the U.S. will take place with Mercury retrograde in the U.S. sun sign of Cancer, moving back and forth across the U.S. natal Mercury 3 times in the U.S. 8th house, mind you, the house of financial treaties and market conditions. All right. Could I be wishing too hard for a return to the U.S. core principles of transparency and responsibility, especially when it comes to international endeavors? We'll see. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed on that one. Is it going to offer the country as a whole the opportunity for what I would call a forensic accounting of our international business ties? You betcha. Okay. Is it going to benefit the coffers of this country, which should be the people's coffers? Not really. Okay. This is likely not to happen until 28 and 29. Remember, in 2026, we are going to have to assert our individual selves regardless of what the country itself does. The predominance of fire signs this year, especially in Aries, along with 2026 being a 1 year okay, numerologically, and a year of the fire horse, which is a double fire energy and imagery, right? What this does is this makes this year, the tendency is going to be face-to-face attitude, right? Nose to nose, so to speak, right? Or precisely, I guess I would call it more an in-your-face attitude. Archetypal Aries. Well, we can expect the martial arts to explode in popularity, as will all self-help situations. Independent contractors are going to be well suited for 2026, as well as any business or person who focuses on breaking addictions, especially pharmaceutical and social media addictions. Hollywood, not going to do very well this year. It will be a year we dry out, so to speak, with even the weather moving from the saturation of the feminine elements as the year first unfolds to the drying out and increased fire danger, high fire danger for the second half of the year. And unfortunately, Aries and Leos like to play with matches. There's no two ways about it, right? One can use a match to light the fire under the cauldron, or one can use a match to torch the world around us. It's not the fire itself that determines the outcome. It's the intention, direction, and purpose of the fire in the first place, our initial intention and the direction of our focus that determines the results. Are we going to be arsonists or alchemists this year? Okay. Do we want to burn things up or burn things down? Right? Are we, I've been posing the question, are we going to be Nero or Noah? Do we build or destroy in 2026? I would say that 2026 is going to have you gathering up the tools that will be able to do the jobs so that you can do the jobs that will need to be accomplished come 2028 and 29. 2026 is to master the craft and gather the tools and start doing the work. Having the right tool for the right job, okay? This is 2026 in a nutshell. Although I would advise or add the caveat, right? Measure twice and cut once. If you have found value in what I've had to say here, you're welcome to donate or buy me a cup of coffee. The link will be in the description. Please like this video and share it with your friends and family. And if you want to partake of any of my astrological services, you can go to my website, mountshastaastrologer.com. And I would especially want to bring to your attention a series of online gatherings, part lecture, part personal challenge, that I just started called The 12 Things You Need to Know About the Aquarian Age. You can read all about the series of teachings on my website, mountshastaastrologer.com, and you can start attending anytime in 2026. Thank you all for sticking with me until the end of my presentation, and don't forget to sign up for my monthly forecasts. Again, the link will be in the description. Do subscribe to my channel, Mount Shasta Astrologer, on YouTube. There is some educational information there. Tech isn't that great, but the information is top-notch there. So bye for now, and may you all have a wonderful, maniful year. Bye for now.